Hey, welcome everyone to the opening session of the Ring at Canada Coaching and Officiating webinar series. I'm really excited to get started on this series, and especially excited about this LTD session that Vicki and myself will be facilitating tonight. Now, before we get started into the kind of breadth of the presentation there, I would like us to acknowledge that the land on which I am this evening is the ancestral, unceded, and territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation people. Now, this territory acknowledgement is a way that we can insert an awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights into everyday life. It is a subtle way to recognize the history of colonialism, understanding a long-standing history that has brought us to reside on this land, as well as to seek to understand our place within that history. This is a current and ongoing process, and we do need to build a mindfulness as in our present participation. So this is why we choose to speak on this today. Now, in terms of, let's see. Beautiful. Okay, so as I mentioned, our session today is being recorded, and that will be used as a future resource and something to refer to. Now, on that line of references and resources here, I did include an LTD session resource sheet. Now, this sheet includes some relevant LTD resources that will be useful for our session today, as well as registration for upcoming webinar sessions. Please feel free to register for those. A post-session question form, as well as a post-session feedback form. Now, we understand that our time today is limited. We're going to do our absolute best to answer any questions and kind of dive into some conversations around LTD. But as I mentioned, our time is limited. So that post-session question form is a really good place for us to continue that conversation, as this isn't something that kind of ends here. In addition to that, there is that post-session feedback form. We do want to hear from you. Don't worry, it can be anonymous, but we'd like to hear how we can improve and what we really did well on, so we can continue to kind of provide helpful resources for everyone across Canada. Now, this LTD resource form has been posted in the chat. It's like a link at the very top of our group chat if you scroll up. It has also been shared to you via email prior to the presentation, and is available via link on that Ring at Canada Coaches domain website, where you probably registered for the session. It's posted there as well, so you can refer there for it. Now, for the session today, we do want the session to be interactive. So we'll be using a few different features throughout the session to kind of facilitate open conversation with our group. We can use the chat and unmute function throughout the entire presentation to kind of pose questions and add any comments that you may have throughout. Vicki and I are going to do our best to answer them as they are posted and posed. So please don't feel like you need to be waiting till the end or anything like that for your questions. We'll kind of cover those throughout the presentation. Another feature that we'll be using to facilitate some conversation is an interactive whiteboard. So when we get to that part of the presentation, we're going to share up our screen, including a whiteboard with a prompt or a question on it. You can then use the chat feature separately and post any kind of comments or answers to the questions that we have in the chat. I'll then copy paste it from the chat and post it on that shared whiteboard so we can all see and collaborate on that topic. If you're having any tech issues throughout the presentation, please do let me know, as we would like everyone to be participating fully. I will assist you as best as I can. I'm sort of a tech whiz, maybe not so much, but I will do my absolute best. We're not sure what that will look like though. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, then I'm going to do a little brief overview of our LTD framework before I introduce our presenter, Vicki Harbour. Now, my name is Hannah Woodman, and I'm the new program coordinator at Ring at Canada. I'm working on programming for athletes, coaches, and officials. Previously in my work in sport, I most recently worked at the provincial office here in BC. So I worked at Ring at BC as a previous sport development coordinator. I'm also enjoying my time in education right now. I'm currently studying at UBC, completing my bachelor's degree in sociology and psychology. I'm in year like 4 or 5 or something crazy like that, and it seems to keep going, but it's good. I'm also currently working to complete my pilot's license here in BC, trying to learn to fly planes, which is really, really fun. But I do have a genuine love and passion for sport, especially ringette. I played ringette here in BC for 17 years, most recently on that BC Thunder NRL team here, as well as on the Team BC for the 2019 Canada Winter Games team. Since then, I've kind of moved to Whistler and Squamish, and I'm enjoying exploring all the other amazing things sport has to offer me. Most recently, I'm most passionate about the sport of highlining, snowboarding, and skydiving. So I'm really excited to bring my lens from my experiences at the provincial and local levels, as well as my experience as an athlete in the sport of ringette, to my work at Ringette Canada, and to talking about LTD with you guys today. So I'm just going to briefly cover this little overview of the definition of the renewed LTD framework here. We're just going to kind of keep that in the back of our minds before we jump into the meat and bones of our presentation here. So the renewed LTD framework works to highlight features of an ideal LTD environment that is driven by quality experiences. So examples of implementation strategies will be paired with relevant methods of measure that we can then look at what is working and what might need some further revision. This renewed resource will impact all aspects of ringette participation in Canada. And there's like an endless list of areas that it will impact. This includes guiding appropriate athlete development, influencing coach education, encouraging officials development, generating meaningful competition, assisting with club and provincial governance, inspiring international performances, as well as fostering lifelong participation in ringette. Now, moving on from there, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Vicki Harbour. She's a Sport for Life advisor, and I will hand it over to Vicki to talk a little bit about herself and then jump into our presentation here.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And for those that haven't yet been able to add into the chat room where you're calling in from, I think there's just a few other people that may have come on. Just love to know where you're from, where you're coming in from. So without just going straight from the introduction here, I'm a retired professor from the University of Alberta, and have been consulting, sort of being a team player with Canadian Sport for Life, now Sport for Life, for what seems equally long a lifetime. And it has been quite the journey with Sport for Life, and I feel incredibly fortunate to have been growing with Sport for Life over this time. And I know some of you on the call tonight had more time and experience with some of you, and really do, as Hannah said, would love this to be, even with the limitations of being remote, to fill up that chat box. There's few enough on here that we can unmute and have a solid conversation about some of the topics we'll be discussing tonight. And so Hannah at Ringette Canada, they've started this series. There'll be a platform of webinars which will be provided. And I've been asked to help out Ringette Canada with their own long-term development renewal plan. And so that is part of a small part of what the conversation will be tonight. But this is really aimed at coaches, and my explanation for that will come shortly. So I'm going to pop into my screen. There we go. So in speaking to coaches, and maybe I should actually check my assumption. Again, just through the chat box, can everybody just put in, yes, I'm a coach, or, and if you're not, if you could type in what your responsibilities are within Ringette Canada. Okay, thank you. Coach, official, oh, there we go.
Wow.
You see, seeing all of these many hats. Coach at the fund level. Yep. Coach developer. Thank you, Beth. And player as well. Coach, excellent. Okay, wonderful. So as those keep coming in, I appreciate that. So my first slide is I'm really, in a very honest kind of way, trying to address coaches, and let alone with everything that's been going on with COVID, where the turning off the light switch for sport, and then the impact on coaches with their players and their athletes. And this is also certainly a comment on the expectations of coaches around this continuous improvement, continuing to learn, and so on. Is that when working with coaches, I understand very much is that the to-do list is always long and rarely gets shorter. And then this expectation of attending various workshops, seminars, webinars, whatever that might be, and having so much information, leading to brain overload. And then some of the responses when working with coaches is there is so much information coming at you sometimes with the intention of improving your abilities as a coach, is that because you're not just a coach in this life, you are often other things as well and have other responsibilities, is that you have limited time. And so you start to triage some of these things, and it becomes, you just make decisions that, you know, I'm not going to be concerned with this. And so I'm highly, highly sensitive to that. And over time, that has been, in working with Sport for Life, I got to say that this has been a recognizable piece that coaches need a little bit more support without it asking them to do more, listen to more, and get more stuff done off that list. So I'm super grateful for you being here, and I really am treading water here with you around trying to reach out and make things a little bit better for you. Bring It Canada has asked me to participate and guide them through their renewal process. And some of the learnings that I've had over the 10 plus years in working in that Sport for Life environment is that we spend way too much time generating resources and little to no time making them come to life. And the area of implementation and making an impact is very tricky. And so that is where I think some of our efforts need to be placed. So next slide, please, Hannah. So around long-term development renewal, some of the questions around, you know, well, why do we need one? Ringet's first one was in 2009. And so you could simply say, well, my goodness, it's over 10 years old, you know, and isn't anything 10 years old deserving of renewal? Maybe your washing machine, but I don't know about a long-term development framework. But certainly, depending on where your sport is and where it wants to go. Again, two of the observations I've had around Sport for Life's impact in the Canadian sports system is that in some of the initial versions of long-term development, it's been very, very athlete-centric. It's been about long-term athlete development. And in our newest version of long-term development 3.0 from Sport for Life, we're taking much more of a holistic perspective. And this particular conversation tonight is about including the coaches within that view around contributors, serious contributors to the sport system. And the second piece that has come about is that not only that expanded view, but as well that we make assumptions when we make a pretty resource, when we make a pamphlet, when we make a strategy. We somehow think that as soon as that work is done, we think the implementation is done. And that is not the case. That is not the case. And I think that has caused justifiably some anger and irritation about what the heck is this long-term athlete development stuff, and this again, genuine, understandable irritation. And so in this effort in Ringette Canada's long-term renewal. Now we can go to the next slide, Hannah, and populate the 3 boxes that are on there. Within the framework now, it's not just looking at the athlete, but it's looking at all of the individuals that make contributions into the sport system. So not just athletes, but coaches, officials, the volunteers, parents, administrative staff. It might be business partners, it might be sponsors, and so on. So as individuals, what are we doing about progress? And then the second layer is the organization. So for example, from the coach's perspective, where do you do your coaching? What are you under a club? Are you under a region? Are you under a particular district? And so how do you fit within that organization? And what does the organization do to help improve the sport, which would include helping to improve the progress of a coach's abilities and skills? And then the third level is more at the system. And again, one might not consider, do coaches see themselves as players in the system? Well, depending on some of the other activities and organizations that you might become a part of, how does this all start to fit together where the system of sport can really start to become a little bit more cohesive and aligned? And yet, these are certainly overlapping, they're not distinct, but it provides a different kind of lens upon which we are looking at recreating or renewing Ringette Canada's long-term development framework. And again, tonight is going to bring it from a coach's perspective. And in my opinion, and I don't mean to irritate people on this one, but I personally don't think our sports system has done as good a job on behalf of coaches as they could be doing right now. And I put myself in that as well. And so this is my attempt at creating dialogue, which puts the coach into that area where, what can we do to help? And it's not simply telling you to take more professional development courses, more seminars and workshops. So what is it about long-term development 3.0 from Sport for Life that is helpful information to the coach? And as some of this information comes out, what I'd like you to consider is, does this have anything to do with the way I'm coaching right now? Am I working with a particular age or stage group that this information might matter, or it might matter within the broader organization with which I'm working? And then once we get through that, then I'm going to be asking you with some more pointed questions using some information coming out of Ringette Canada's resources. So again, at any time that you've got questions or comments about things, please fill up that chat room, or you could even raise a hand, because like I say, we're a small group tonight where lots of people can chat. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. And then if you could populate that circle and then one more. Thank you.
Beautiful. So
one thing that has changed is this rectangle. And on the right-hand side, first of all, you see awareness and first involvement. In earlier versions of this rectangle, that first involvement and awareness used to reside just at the lower stages, at those early stages between active start and learn to train. And we understand now that awareness of a sport can come at any age. Your first experience in any sport can come at any age or stage, particularly with newcomers arriving to Canada, opportunities across transfer in sport. And so the question I have for you as you ponder as a coach is, how do people become aware of your sport where you are? And this might get you to think about, well, I really don't have to have active methods or strategies. People, players, families just come, and that's the way it's always been. And yet right now, because of COVID, and in your sport in particular, which is still largely dominated by participation with girls and women is that we are hemorrhaging numbers. They are leaving the sport, leaving all sports. And there are some very depressing numbers about the impact of COVID on these youngsters coming back into sport. And now, again, in the chat room, if some of you are experiencing this completely differently, maybe some of you are realizing there's a drop in numbers. Again, please feel free to add in the chat room. So the idea of, how do you bring awareness to people around your sport? And then once individuals become aware of your sport and they want to give it a try, then they are having their first experience or first involvement. And what do you create within your own sporting environment to make that first experience positive, and you want them to leave wanting to come back? Because the way in which we create those first involvement experiences is not something that we sustain for those that continue to return, and the whole idea of retention. So this is a new piece for Sport for Life. The other one is train to train. And we're recognizing that train to train stage is just filled with a time of turbulence for our youngsters that are going through growth spurts, this massive turbulent changing period of puberty, other issues with growth and development around changes in social cognition, brain development. And we understand the impact then that sport may have on these growing youngsters. And as well, it becomes a very critical time for these youth to determine, am I going to stay stuck in here, or do I feel welcome? Do I feel like I belong here? Or if not, it becomes a very easy way for them to exit. And so we're understanding within Train to Train, there's all of these factors that are contributing towards quality sport. And again, as coaches, are we cognizant that if we are working within this very turbulent stage space, which can, from a growth and development point of view, might start from about the age of 10 and 11, go all the way up to 15 to 16, where there's all of this chaos and changing going on, how do you manage that? Particularly in a team environment where chances are you've got a whole range of different growth periods, early matures, late matures, and so on. So the implications for you in managing your coaching environment become quite important, and how you try to manage that. So that's one of the big changes. And so then I start to think, well, how can we help coaches manage some of this information and make it easy for them to do the best possible job on behalf of their participants and make those quality experiences happen for their participants. Next slide, please. Just saw in there.
And we have some information in the chat here about some of the numbers and the experiences coaches are having.
Yeah.
It seems that it's consistently U16, U19 and up age groups are struggling generally for numbers, whereas some of those younger divisions like Fundamentals 1, U12 aren't doing quite as bad. So that's kind of the experience that we're seeing there after.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I say not wonderful for the drop in numbers, but thank you for that to, again, to sort of see what might be happening. So other information. Now, I was just giving you some of the information from Sport for Life. If we look at now some Ring It Canada specific information, I've got two of them here. One is a recently completed competition review and restructuring report from 2018, and then the full athlete development matrix from last year, 2020. And I'm wise enough to know that if you were, even though I have been told that these have been shared, disseminated, and so on, I would not be foolish enough to ask, have you read these? And to be quite honest, these I myself have not. Well, I've read one, but not the other, from one page to the next. And again, from a coach's perspective, it is the responsibility of the writers of these that these are both filled with lots and lots of rich information. Yet from a coach's perspective, remember back to that initial slide where it's brain overload, you don't have a lot of time, creating something that is more feasible, readable, and usable within the hands of a coach to pluck out those nuggets that are easy for you to digest, and again, make it desirable and interesting, maybe piquing your curiosity around what you might wish to try within your coaching practices. I'm going to take a couple of things out of the competition review to stoke some of our conversation, to take that a little bit further for us tonight. And again, if there are any thoughts on these materials, as if you have put your eyes through some of them, if there are any thoughts or opinions on those from a coaching perspective, whether or not they have been helpful to you or not, that too is beneficial information to hear. Next slide, please, Hannah. So then the implications. So with Ring It Canada's LTD renewal process, we know the implications of a framework renewal has implications just about in every single area of the sport. Certainly, if there's updates to athlete development, it's going to reflect or impact on players. It will help guide coach education because we want coaches to be supported in coaching the player based on where that player is at, whether they are in that learn to train stage, whether they are further on the other side of train to train, whether they are in a pursuit of excellence and so on. It is also going to impact officials. Officials are so important to the game. They're another integral part because of how they're a bit of like a conductor of an orchestra. They help keep the pieces together during competition, and they help players learn about the sport as well through those different levels. And certainly implications would include governance at levels of clubs, at provincial sport organizations, and even at the national level. So next slide, please. So again, a slide for the coaches, and not only do you have a lot on your plate around that coaching progress and coach development, coach education. On this slide, I just wanted to portray an understanding that most coaches these are not full-time professional careers. Very few sports within this country, coaches can hold a full-time, adequately paid profession as a coach. Most coaches are looking at other responsibility and tasks, whether or not they're also a parent. They might be part of, again, other family duties. They will likely have another job or career. They might have other volunteer duties as well. They might have some connections with their community. And this is not exhaustive by any chance, but it gives a sense that the coach is but one role that you play, and there are other parts of one's life that takes up time and to help manage those coaching responsibilities. Again, it's another reminder to the sport system to make it as easy as possible for the coach to become as good a coach as possible. And if that coach wishes to pursue more learning how to do things differently, how to manage players differently, how to tactically, whatever that the coach may wish along their journey, that the sports system makes that easy for them in an impactful, effective kind of way. Next slide, please. So on your journey then, as As a coach right now, and maybe before, I'm just going to ask you one question here that I'd like you to add to the chat box. Is if you could think of one thing right now that you would like to put into your coach kit that you would like to know more about, what would you put down? And you know what, maybe some of you are feeling pretty okay with where you're at right now, but is there something that may have piqued your curiosity around what you would like to know more about to help you in your coaching? What would you put down into that chat box? And if someone would like to speak to this, some brave soul, I think we can unmute you. No one wants to speak. Oh, Jackson Lindsay's raised your hand. Thank you, Jackson. And there we go. Can we?
Let's see if we can get you unmuted there, Jackson. If you have the capabilities on your end, for sure, go for it.
Okay, so my name is actually Lindsay. I don't know why it comes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so I think for myself is what I struggle with constantly is goalie development resources. I think that it's really hard in our little associations to find those goalies that are able to come back and give back to Ringette. But I just think largely in general, just overall resources for goalies, how to keep them engaged. I find that goalies also are those really tough ones to keep in that sport at that U16, U19 levels. And you end up losing some, a lot of the time, sometimes I find that they go to hockey. But just how to keep those players engaged and how to make sure that they get the long-term development that they need so that they can succeed throughout their Ringette career. I think that would be something that I would need to help me in my back pocket.
Yeah. And Lindsay, when you talk about it, I can appreciate at the U16, U19 level, it's tough to keep them in. Have you had a chance to chat with any of them around what takes them out of the sport? What are the reasons?
So, I haven't had too many conversations, but the one that has been kind of like the most disheartening was we actually, the year prior to COVID, had an excellent little goalie. And she was actually a U16, but we brought her up to U19 because at U19 we had no goalies. And I tried to focus as hard as I could on engaging her just because I knew that she was younger and that it's overwhelming, obviously, coming up a whole age level to play at a competitive level. And I thought that, you know, we had kind of a goal for her to make sure that she was going to step up into a AA role the year prior, but then obviously COVID hit, which was really unfortunate. And then I ended up switching associations, and now I've learned that she's actually not coming back to Ringette at all. And I did see her, she came to help out for an exhibition game, and so I did see her at the arena, and I just asked, you know, like, what is it? Why is it that you're not coming back? Like, what is stopping you? And for her, it was honestly, she just said, it's not doing it for me anymore, and I want to focus on school. I think that COVID also hit at a specific time where for these U16, U19 girls, where they were able to start focusing on something different. So I think that it's a whole different aspect right now. But I even remember when I was, you know, playing at the U16, U19 level and losing a few goalies. And I think it is just purely the lack of coaching that is dedicated to goalies. Goalies often feel like they're left out of practice plans. You know, you just skate with the girls for your warm up, and then we'll take a couple shots and then sit in the net, and we'll, run some drills and you'll get some shots. So I think, I really do think that it's the lack of development at those higher age levels that lets girls feel left out.
Yes.
And they want to feel like they're part of the team too.
Yeah, that is, that's so well stated, Lindsay. And you're right. If, to feel like a bit of an afterthought is not a very warm place to stay. And I have read in the chat box as well, there's another comment about lack of support and coaching for goaltending. So I know that Hannah has on the seminar, or on the webinar series, a goaltending one coming up. But again, what you're talking about, Lindsay, is a real pragmatic issue about because every team has goalies. So what can an entire league, what can an entire region? So that becomes, again, that's an excellent question or issue to raise that, again, needs some attention, let alone the impact of COVID. Again, as sad as you describe, unfortunately, is altogether too common. And Beth, I love this comment too in the chat box. Coaching ringette goalkeepers is very different from hockey, and we do need more resources for goalkeepers. Agree, there's lack of development throughout the stages. We need to develop more goalies from early on. Yeah, and it's just that idea of paying attention, because it's a unique skill set, and that is warranted as well. So thank you for that. And then one other comment that caught my attention, Marilyn Dion, to be able to exchange with other coaches across the country on basics, strategies and techniques. I agree. I think, and the part that jumps right out at me is when coaches get an opportunity to connect with each other and have that conversation. Holy smokes. When I'm in rooms where that happens, there is so much exchange that goes on. And it's it's a community of coaches that are there to share the stories, share the learnings, share sometimes the miseries that have occurred. And it's a very strong format. And yet again, when if we think about coaches who may have limited time, many other responsibilities on their plate, that is tough to swing. But I know some clubs, and again, this is across other sports as well, when they've been able to step up and create a space and place and time for coaches to convene and do exactly that has had a really positive impact at the club level. And and we can talk more about that later if that's something that might be of interest to some of you on the call as well. So thank you for that. So let's jump to the next slide. Hannah, thank you. So these are, one more comment there from, I don't know if it's Tim or Mary. We hosted a Come and Try goalie session at the beginning of our season in line with the Come Try Ringette. We had 13 new young athletes come out and put pads on to give it a try. Huge success. Bravo. Way to go. You see, that's almost like that begs for a follow-up, like, hey, let's check in with you in about a month. And let's see how that one's going as well. So you see, that's like the building of awareness, and you've created this dynamite first involvement for them. And now there's another next step. Now, how do you keep them dialed in and curious and stoked in that? And so that's when it becomes, again, sort of following up with that becomes, again, lots of potential in there. So that's often, oh, good. Feel free to reach out what we are doing in Nepean. Lovely. Thank you for that generosity. And, oh, you see, now we're starting to cook in the chat room here. I also have had males take on goalie roles in our association and league, and it is a little disheartening. Girls then don't want to compete against the boys for the position, and some of them are very intimidated in shooting on them as they are generally bigger and stronger. Okay, yeah, that's again, completely valid, completely valid. And so now we're starting to talk about how do you create modifications within either practice scenarios, training scenarios, competition scenarios, even within league games, that there is, what do you create in the game so that everybody feels they are being suitably challenged? And that again is with some of the modifications of games, and who gets played on the team, or there are some concrete strategies to do that. And again, depending on, Craig, can I ask you what age group your comment is related to, or stage that you're working with? Or Hannah, do you know Craig and his group?
No, unfortunately, I do not.
Okay.
Perhaps it will pop up in the chat there in a moment, if not.
Yeah. And so when that, so because part of
U14 and U16.
U14 and U16. So and there can be, again, that's again, now we're in that sort of train to train area where there's so much diversity and growth and development. So tell you what, if we can chat about that afterwards, Craig, but again, you're sort of right into the thick of those differences within the sex. There's enough variation within girls, let alone then when you start adding in diversity or the variation that occurs within boys, you really are, I mean, first and foremost, again, hats off to you for creating opportunities with that. And again, I've got a few things rolling through my head, but we can come back to that. So these two questions here, and this is what's going to constitute a bit of a chat room for us. And actually, first of all, Hannah, sorry, I've got to show two more slides before we go to the whiteboard.
Sure, sounds good.
Yep.
I was jumping the gun there.
No, that's okay. That's okay. And so these two questions, and I'm going to give you some information that has been plucked either from Ring It Canada's The Competition Review resource, because I want to sort of pull out some of the information from that resource that I think is really intriguing to discuss with coaches around what it means to you, what you might try and do with it. Would you like to know more about it? That kind of stuff. So, so I'm going to, and then, so these two questions we will be discussing in light of some of these the questions. And the first question is, how do you know you are getting better at coaching? Okay. And then the second part of this is, what does support for your coaching look like? Now, some of you might already have ideas about how do you know you're getting better at coaching? Well, I dare say if some of you, just in talking about some of those goalie issues, and how to create an appropriate developmental experience specifically for goalies, that might be something that you would feel, you know what, my coaching's gotten better because I'm incorporating more quality experiences for goalies. For Craig, looking back at if girls are feeling intimidated to with when there is a boy in net, what are some of the modifications that one could make where there's less concern and less obstacles in front or for those good shot selection to be had. So those kinds of ideas might make you feel, you know what, my coaching's getting better. I'm aware of this now, and I'm going to put this into trial. And then, as I say, that second part is when you think about as a coach in your place, in your landscape, when you feel supported, what does that look like? So the content that I'm going to give you to start with, the first one here are what I call like these topics of interest. So next slide, please, Hannah. there are 3 areas that come out within athlete development. And I've kind of packaged these around the growth and development. So certainly in that learn to train, train to train stages, absolutely involved within there. And there are 3 areas around relative age effect. And relative age effect is where if you've got team selection based on chronological age. So if it's if you use the calendar year that starts at January 1 and runs till December 31st, we understand that children born in January could be as much as 11 months older than those born in December, yet they're playing together. And so there is lots of good science out there that shows relative age effect, that those that are born earlier in those years become more inclined to advance to higher levels of performance. And it's not necessarily because they are technically better. A lot of it is often due is that they just grew up faster and they get those opportunities then. They're selected because they're better. And there's an attrition that occurs, a loss of those players then, or it makes it very difficult for those players born in the later quartiles of the year to advance. So that's a relative age effect. And again, when most of our sports are stuck on chronological age, that is again an obvious condition that that coaches need to be aware of, particularly if you're involved in team selection. And are you making choices based on what you see or what might be? And sort of 2 distinctly different phenomena. Biobanding is where children are matched according to their percent of their adult height. And so there are ways of assessing that. And so you almost ignore chronological age, and based on the height of the child, of the player or participant compared to the height of their parents, you get an estimate of, are they at 80% of their adult height? Are they at 90% of their adult height? And this often addresses those early versus late maturers, those that seem to shoot up overnight and they're literally head and shoulders taller than their teammates. And so there are excellent mechanisms in place in which players can be biobanded, and they can occasionally go into training with biobanded groups. There are some competitions that can be structured around biobanded, and it's not an all or nothing. It doesn't mean you don't ever return to your chronological age group, but this becomes a way in which you can offer these players what they need at their developmental moment. And then this third one around multi-sport participation is when do you ask your players, if you're coaching in that perhaps higher performance area or more dedicated level of performance, when do you ask them, I only want people playing ringette all the time? And I don't know when that happens in ringette and what your thoughts or feelings are on that. But that again, there's lots that we're understanding about multi-sport participation, and largely the message is around the benefits of it, particularly in team sports, particularly in sports such as yours, where there's an object. So you've got your stick, you've got the ring, and the whole skating technical piece. Those features of your game make it very amenable to having multi-sport experiences for your young players. Now, you might be all in favor of that, but if your league or system has a particularly heavy schedule of competition, which then seems to demand a particularly heavy schedule of training, where the heck are you supposed to fit in other sport experiences? So then all of a sudden the coach might want their athletes to experience multi-sports, But the system then becomes an obstacle because the league system, the competition schedules do not allow for that to happen. And that's a point that we're realizing more and more, particularly from parents and from athletes, is that they want to be able to enjoy more sports up to the age of 16 and 17 and not just dabble in it. They want to be able to train and compete in these other sports. But the way in which competitive sport is organized for 18 and under doesn't allow for it. Mm-hmm. It's too busy. It's too packed and jammed. So that's a real problem here. And so as a coach, what do you do with your players who still want to go and play basketball or volleyball or having track? Oh, here we go. And oh, there's Marilyn. Could we hear from you to speak to this? I'd love to hear more about this, please. Oh, I'm going to have to unmute you here. Ask to unmute.
No, okay, I can do myself. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
I thought I did it. I used to coach the U19 and now I'm coaching the NRL, but usually when my players are like, they're playing like summer sports most of the time. Mm-hmm. So the seasons are up one on another on September, October. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the season, it's the contrary, that they're starting the summer sports. So normally I let them to in priority finish their season in mm-hmm. September, October. I'm more open to they're missing some practice or even some games. So I can understand that they are like finishing their season and they're training for this all the summer. Mm-hmm. And we're talking and exchanging with the players. And I don't understand English. I think because I'm doing that at the end of the season when we are in finals, I know that the coaches of the other sport can understand that the priority would be ringette because mm-hmm. they're starting like, let's say the soccer. So mm-hmm. I think when we're able to be not to, you have to be there, you have to be all at practice because you're going to be caught. And when mm-hmm. we're showing opening to the players and the other coaches, even though we don't know them, I think it's making like easier for the players to do some other sports that can help them to grow as an athlete.
Yes. Oh,
and also stay engaged in ringette itself. That was my experience in the NRL. It was such a high level of commit, so it didn't make it possible for me to do anything else. So I did end up letting go of competitive ringette because I wanted to explore all these other things in my life. So that flexibility was the largest piece that made me have to say, okay, I can't commit. I can't give the team what's appropriate anymore. So I have to walk away. So mm-hmm. that flexibility piece is definitely huge.
Yeah. And Marilyn, I think it was, it is so wonderful. I mean, that is such a unique story around the cooperation that I hear between you and the varsity coaches. And yet it seems that with your openness to this, and you've picked up on that, is that when the coaches themselves have allowed for this type of crosstalk and communication between the two sports, you make it work. Mm-hmm. And the athletes get that. They see that, and then they don't feel guilty or torn about when they're in one place, they feel they should be in the other, and vice versa. So I hugely applaud that. And I think you've been, I don't know what it was like for you to sort that out, but I imagine a fair bit of bravery was required. So bravo. And thank you so much for that. I think that's one of those, I know Beth has just said, well said, Marilyn, and I will echo that. Well said. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's wonderful. And And it's funny, I mean, Marilyn's sharing that story at the university level, and yet I worry for our younger participants. So those that are involved in whether they've got club sports, they've got school sports, and then some of them, if they're participating in sort of higher level competitions, it makes it extremely difficult. In fact, in Alberta, where I reside, there are some schools that tell their school athletes, you are not allowed to play for your club during school sports. And some clubs will do the same, saying while you are playing the club sport, you cannot play for school sports. And so there is not the camaraderie, Marilyn, that you have just described. And so it robs our younger athletes of those precious experiences of being involved in another sport, getting a different experience, a different skill set, learning to be under a different coach, learning to be with other teammates. All of those are remarkably powerful, and we don't do enough to help make that happen. So anyway, thank you for that. So those are, again, topics that warrant deeper discussion within coaches and to help. So I don't know if other coaches right now, I believe Marilyn's approach was more known about, it could help reshape the culture. You just read my brain there, is that when we hear about stories like that, we go, I wonder if I could do that where I live in my club. And so you give others inspiration to try something, and because we know it's the right thing to do. And so these then become topics that can be discussed with coaches. And for me, that helps me answer, how can I support coaches? How can I facilitate those kinds of dialogues to help make these better things happen? And that's all around just the example of multi-sport participation. So these topics then, again, warrant much deeper conversation, but become explicit ways in which we can provide coaches more information and about the how to do it, the implementation. Now let's pop to the next one here, Hannah. Next slide. So this is, again, this is probably the wordiest slide. And I don't know if those of you on the call tonight, if you've heard of the term meaningful competition. And it's something at Sport for Life, we sort of captured this a number of years ago, and it went right from youth sport all the way up to Canada Games Council. And because we wanted to understand the idea of what is meaningful competition. And these 3 points capture what is meant by meaningful competition. And this then is another one of these topics of interest that I ask coaches, when you read this, you know, do you agree with it? And are there pieces in here that you would like to know more about, learn more about, so that you can adopt these ideas and bring them to your own athletes, to your own clubs? Because again, competition is really, I mean, such a core aspect of sport. And this is not attempting to water it down, but this is the intention behind this is to keep as many people as possible in sport. Because when we are experiencing meaningful competition, we always want to come back if these factors are being satisfied. So the 3 pieces here is that, first and foremost, meaningful competition supports learning. So that as a coach, if you can imagine all of your players going into this with the attitude, we can get better. And every single game encourages improvement. And That's in the competition environment, not just in your training sessions. The second one is that the competition format, so whether it's a modified game, whether it's for the youngsters with cross ice, whether it's all the way up to the full game at the NRL and beyond, the format itself, you know, how many games are played over what period of time in the league or tournaments, it's structured to reinforce developmentally appropriate experiences and environments. So for those youngsters, well, the cross ice is intended to satisfy this because it's developmentally appropriate. The wee ones, the under 10s, they get much more benefit and opportunity to learn when they have less ice to cover. They get to work more on their technical skills. The teamwork and bonding and communication explodes more in that small game format than when you put those 8-year-olds onto a full ice experience. And so the understanding is, well, do I know what my players need? Do I understand their developmental state across all aspects of athlete development? So the technical, tactical, their physical development. What about their psychological development? And what about what's wrapped up in the life skills around their social emotional competencies or their cognitive competencies? And is competition being structured and formatted to challenge them at that developmentally appropriate level? And then the third one, and this again becomes one of the metrics that we use to determine has meaningful competition occurred? One of the metrics, not the sole one, is that results are relatively close and not predictable. So when we think about the typical blowout in a game, 10, 12, nothing. I saw in the news yesterday, there was a high school football team somewhere in California that won 106-0. And I'm thinking, who gets anything out of that? I mean, clearly, I guess the people who are the victors think, they've just thumped somebody else. But what is the learning in that? What is their possible learning in that? And then if you think about the team that is lost or been at the hands of that thumping, what's in it for them? What is the learning? Have they really felt that they've been put into a situation where we can get better? Marilyn, yes, I see your hand up.
I think the difference is the coaches more in young categories, but they want to win. They don't want them necessarily to learn things, but they want them to win. Mm-hmm. So if we could change the format in no results, like we're doing it in some levels in Quebec, like the U8, the U10, they're just playing and there's no score on the board and they are just playing. But I think we should imply that in other levels to, instead of doing a tournament, have someone winning. Let's do a run robin and play against everybody to learn. And then at the end of the year, we can do a tournament or provincials to see how we improve, and then we can have a winner. But sometimes it's more winning than learning. Yes. And when coaches will understand that, because when you're talking with, sometimes I'm exchanging with young coaches that are coaching young categories, they just want to know the tricks to win. And I'm like, I don't want them to win. I want them to learn. So when I get them in U19 and U16 and NRL, I'm not showing them things that you should have learned in U12 or U14. Yeah. But it's hard for them to have this. It's winning whatever it means. So yes, we have to change that in the coaching minds. But it's hard because we're playing competition, so we want to win on one side. But we have to know when it's important to win, or what's the meaning of all this season. Sometimes I think it's that it's more difficult for the coaches that the season is for learning, and some points in the season, maybe at the end, we can try to win things, but what did we learn all the season?
Marilyn, how did you get to be so wise? You're very young to be that wise.
And I'm a teacher.
Oh,
maybe that's influencing everything.
Yes, you know what? And yes, I dare say that, yeah, so the power of learning, and so if that, and you're right, it is very much the case within our younger youth sport divisions, where winning comes at the expense of the needed development, as you so nicely said as well, comes at the expense of learning. And so what kinds of ways in which the competition format can be modified that enables those ideas that you've just expressed. And that is, and Hannah, if you've read the competition review, there are some suggestions around those very pieces that Marilyn has talked about from an experience point of view. What can be done so some of those younger coaches become less focused on only winning at as opposed to understanding who's in front of them and how can I help them learn? How can I help them develop? Is there was another comment in there. Lindsay, I always say that we need to come back to development ringette. Playing high level is such a focus, but we seem to curtail and forget about keeping younger and development level players engaged in the game. Yes, well said, well said. And I think that is, so this piece around meaningful competition, I don't know if, I don't know that we have the time to discuss, but I know when I've been in other rooms discussing meaningful competition and talking about the blowout game, and some coaches don't see anything wrong with a blowout, whether or not they deliver the blowout or whether they receive the blowout. They seem to think that that's a very good learning experience. And anyway, we agree to disagree on that, but there are some coaches very connected to the win-loss column for sure. So thank you for those inputs. And now I want to sort of take you into the whiteboard. And so with these topics, as Hannah's loading up the whiteboard now, what I'd like you to think about are those two questions. And let's just address the first one, where I've asked, how do you know you are getting better at coaching? What are some of those things that in your coaching journey where you go, you know what, I've become better at that? And you put that into the chat room, take a couple minutes just to put down, and then Hannah's going to do a copy and paste and populate this particular whiteboard. And if you've got more than one idea around how you know you're getting better, there's no limit. And so I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes of peace and quiet here. I'll stop flapping my gums and you can add some things into the chat box. Thanks for setting that up, Hannah.
No worries. Look at you guys go. Oh, how I wish I was in the same room as everybody right now. This is such a wonderful exchange. Thank you. Wow. Beth, way to go when you get the parents on side. That's a big one too.
Players coming to you with ideas. Players, oh, wow. Peer feedback. Holy smokers, Craig. Is that with your U14, U16s? Peer feedback? I've got to hear from you, Craig, about that one. Enjoying the exercises. Yep. Oh, look at this. Okay, Craig, can I call on you just to say a little bit more about that while we're getting?
Yeah, you bet. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, clear as a bell.
Yeah, so I mean, for us, I mean, I'm from Calgary, and I mean, a lot of the same coaches I've either coached with, or we've grown up with the girls through active start through U10, U12, and even have done some ringette courses together. But we have coached together, and then we compete against each other, and then you get to know some of the network of other coaches in the other associations. So yeah, I mean, when we're at different camps or after a game, we talk. It's like, what worked for you? And as much as we're competitive on the ice, we're trying to learn, and we're trying to do the best for the girls. So we talked about what's working for us, and share drills and share game experiences, and then also each other's sounding boards as these adolescents go through all the wonderful things they go through.
Wow, that whole phenomena of peer feedback is such a strong indication of trust as well. So again, when that plays out well, Craig, that speaks volumes about that trusting climate that you've created for your players. So that's so valuable. That's so valuable. Thank you for that, Craig. Renee, can I call on you to talk about, gosh darn it, where did it go to now? When players choose their strategies based on their abilities to read the game. Can you just give me a bit of context on that, Renee?
Sure. Sorry if it's a little loud. I'm actually. We started this with some of our U10 step 3s a couple of years ago, which was just giving them the tools and giving them also the situations in which the tools would be the most effective, and doing that in a practice situation so that when it came to game situations, they would be able to read how the game was going and how it aligned with the tools that they had, and selecting which one was better for them based not only on what their opponents were doing in the game, but also on who was on the ice at that time.
Yeah. Oh, and I hear in that, Renee, too, that you've given them a chance to do that in practice. And then when they take that into a game, it's a little bit familiar. Oh, this is brilliant. Yeah.
It was really building their confidence to be able to do it in a situation that wasn't a practice.
Yes, yes. Excellent. Oh, thank you for that, Renee. Love that one. And one more here, Beth. You talk about parents and players say they are enjoying playing, learning new things, and feeling safe in all ways. Again, Beth, could you give like a wee bit of context on that, sort of like age group, and just so we can sort of understand the story?
I can try. I have laryngitis, but
oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I just try very hard to survey parents, talk to them, as well as the players. Start out with a survey to what do you expect out of the year, and a bunch of questions about that, and then a couple more throughout the year just to make sure that we're on the right track. And I just feel that those are the 3 key things that are going to keep the players engaged if they're enjoying themselves in whatever way, enjoyment, whatever that means to them, and are learning new things. If they're not learning new things, they're not going to stay engaged.
Yeah.
And whatever feedback it is that we give them, peer feedback is, if you can build up to that peer feedback, I absolutely agree. That is such an amazing tool, self-reflection, all of those kinds of things to support.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just feeling safe and secure in their participation in the team.
And Beth, what age group are you working with?
I would go right back to, so I started coaching in 1980 something. So I've coached like all the way through. I would say on every single level. That's we used to have an age group called bunnies. So as my daughter was going through, I helped coach her as well. And I mean, I would say at all levels. As I coached in the NRL, and that level, not so much the parents as in that context at all. Although having been a parent of an NRL player, I know that you know, that parents are still involved in their kids learning and participation. So
yeah. Well, that's a thing of beauty, Beth. Thank you so much for sharing that. So this is wonderful. We're going to be able to capture this. And now one more whiteboard. And then I'm looking at the time. We're going to be wrapping up with this next whiteboard and the question. So you can save that, right, Hannah? And then.
Yep, it's been saved, and that will be sent out following the presentation for us to be able to kind of look at and review. And then I'm just going to grab another prompt here for us.
Yeah, so this next question Hannah's going to put on the whiteboard is, what does support for your coaching look like? And sometimes when I ask coaches this question, it's almost, sometimes the flip side of that is almost easier to answer, like, when do I know I'm not being supported? But I'm trying to frame it in the positive. What does support for your coaching look like? And so again, if you put some thought to that, and then into the chat box again and again, Hannah's going to populate that for us on here. And now, has an assistant coach involved? Yes. And support, I want you to think about in all different kinds of ways of support. Parents trusting the season plan, okay? Development opportunities with coach mentors or coaches of more advanced teams. And parents that support the way I'm coaching and making decisions. Working with a mentor has really helped. Formation. Okay. I know in Beth's remark before was about at the beginning of a season talking about expectations. And those kinds of conversations can really, from a team perspective, be extremely helpful around what do you want to have happen this season, and what are the kinds of things you want to work towards. And when there is a good full out discussion, I know some practices of this will actually with younger players will include the parents. And they might not be at the same meeting, but there's an opportunity to share player expectations with parent expectations. And I've heard from some coaches that when that is done, it reminds the parents that it's their child that is playing, and it is their child's expectations and desires to be met, not the parents. And it can sometimes disentangle parent satisfaction from what the team's goals are. exchanging with coaches, an association support team and coach development, confidence support, ensuring coaches have all the resources and support. If not available, it says reach out. Tim and it says Tim and Mary, so I'm not sure who to address this to, but I would love to hear more about that one. If you're able to chat with us.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just hang on one sec.
Sure. And maybe while Tim is just getting ready for that, are there, and I'm assuming that what you have posted in here, these are support experiences that you've had. And would, if I could also maybe ask, and again, just before Tim adds in here, what would support look like that you have yet to experience, but you think would be certainly a wonderful experience of support? If anything comes to mind, that too would be really valuable information to us. Tim.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back quickly to the goaltending stream, and the fact that I think it's a little surprising is that this sport is played on the international level, but yet there is no coach stream certification or training module within Ringette Canada to support a goaltender. Mm-hmm. It's one of the, I won't say it's the most important position, but if you don't have them, you don't play. Yes. So, and that's pretty much where the support is. And I think a lot of people want to help and do and support, but they're afraid to, because they're afraid they're going to say something wrong or do something wrong. And I just think there needs to be more support for these coaches.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
No, that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, and that was something that jumped out right away at the beginning, and I can see that that's a gap, and that gap should no longer be ignored, and that some sooner than later attention needs to be paid to that as well. And so I hear that loud and clear, and that makes beyond common sense, that there needs to be better support for goaltending, the developmental pathway, and coaching support with that as well. I am mindful of the time here. I can't believe it. It's already 30 minutes past the hour. So Hannah, can I ask you to save that, please? And then we're just going to stop sharing and just go back to the slide presentation, please.
Beautiful. Sounds good.
And we're going to go just to the next slide, please.
Beautiful.
There we go. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for your contributions tonight, and my intention in this, in working with Ringette Canada around their renewal process into the framework, is that it is a renewed resource with the user in mind, not simply to create a checklist of having completed all of the different segments that are necessary. And part of this process is going to be reaching out into the Ringette community and getting feedback, coaches becoming an integral part of that, saying, do you see yourself in this? And do you see ways in which these ideas will make it better for you? And I hear loud and clear from tonight, certainly issues around goaltending, around getting to all levels of athlete development as within all positions of the game is essential. So that's it. Seems to be a very clear mandate. And if down the road your club has word of this, gets the communication rollout, and if there are ever opportunities for you to provide feedback, whether you end up on the work group or not, your feedback will always be welcome. And in order to ensure that this has implementation traction to it, and that you get yourself feeling that your own coach journey is getting better. And your clarity and contributions in the call tonight have been extremely valuable. So again, I'm so grateful for that. And I'm going to let Hannah do any final sign off as required.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vicki. I won't keep anyone too much longer because we've taken up your time. Thank you so much for being so great and interactive throughout the session. That was really awesome. I'm going to follow up with the question follow-up form as well as the feedback form so we can kind of continue to facilitate that conversation on LTD. When Vicki and I were talking about doing this session, we were talking about how one session isn't going to solve all the problems and how we want to continue that conversation. So we may be thinking about doing an additional LTD framework session following this one, like as a follow-up where you can have a roundtable and more discussion about this. It's one of the questions in the feedback form that if you would be interested in attending something like that, we'd love to know. So I will send that stuff out. I thank you guys so much for attending. If you have any questions or follow-up, please email me at hannah@ringette.ca or just use those forms that I'm going to be emailing out to you. This was a really great time with you all, and we really appreciate all the participation. And that's probably all. You can stick around if you have any additional questions for myself. Maybe Vicki can stick around for a little bit longer. Other than that, you are free to go. Thank you guys so much for all your time.
Thank you very much, everybody.